Hello there and welcome back to the channel. This is Nerd World Empire and today looking at the Ferengi once again. Now, like any good capitalist organization, they need to protect their assets like anyone else. So we're looking at that most lucrative of markets, weapons. As we know, war is good for profit. It's also peace is good for profit. Everything to the Ferengi is good for profit. Now, we're not just talking about weapons the Ferengi would sell, because the Ferengi will sell pretty much anything and buy pretty much anything that they think they can make a profit on. But sometimes you've just got to have the guns yourself to really protect your interests and your ships. Now, I've already done a video on the Ferengi Marauder and its firepower, so I'll only cover it briefly here, and I'm mostly going to focus on the kind of weapons the Ferengi choose to use themselves, as in the domestically produced portable weapons used by the Ferengi. Their ships generally were well armed, although this varied from ship to ship depending on classification, age and the wealth of its commanding officer. The typical weapons carried aboard a Ferengi vessel consisted of phasers, missile systems, interestingly, photon torpedoes and plasma weapons, although these can vary. An energy dampening weapon as well, capable of knocking out shields, was also fairly commonly installed aboard Ferengi Marauders, giving the vessels a deceptively strong and powerful capability beyond what you would initially think. But, as I said, I've done a video on that previously, so we're going to get to the kind of weapons the Ferengi make, and Ferengi weapons surprisingly get a little bit exotic. So let's begin. Let's start with the most basic type of weapon utilized by the Ferengi, and that would be the phaser. This came in two forms, of the Ferengi military and general surplus population, as well as sold to other powers. This was the Ferengi hand phaser and the Ferengi phaser rifle. Both of these fired in beam form only, it seemed. The most common was the hand phaser, which had the distinctive appearance of being relatively flat, hand-sized obviously, as it's a handheld weapon with a projector nozzle mounted atop the weapon. It had a kill and stun setting, but wasn't believed to be as versatile as its Federation counterpart, meaning it basically had kill, stun and very little in between. However, it was a popular weapon and it still worked against the various enemies of the Ferengi. We can assume that as the Ferengi made this weapon for themselves, it was perhaps a little better made than some of the stuff they would fob off on other people, but who's to say that is for certain. The rifle is more interesting in that it has been around since the 22nd century, when it was first seen by a group of Ferengi pirates that attempted to hijack the Enterprise NX-01, although variations of the Ferengi rifle have been seen in use up until the 24th century. But little to nothing is known about the capabilities of these weapons. Both weapons under Federation science are technically classified as a plasma weapon, or possibly plasma-based matrix, creating the forced energy particle stream of the weapon. Side note, these weapons were also seen utilized by a group of renegade Borg under the command of Lore when he severed them from the collective. They would have a weapon that looked strikingly similar to the Ferengi hand phaser attached to their forelimbs. Now, either the Borg assimilated this weapon and installed it upon themselves, they reverse engineered and copied the design, which is also a possibility considering that's how the Borg sort of make stuff, or it just was a coincidence that it happened to look like a Ferengi hand phaser. This could indicate that the Borg considered the Ferengi phaser to be a superior weapon to those used by, say, powers like the Dominion, the Cardassians, the Federation, the Klingons or the Romulans, whom also had very sophisticated weapons technology. Or the Borg simply considered the Ferengi weapon disposable, never bothered to properly assimilate it, and last time they'd assimilated a Ferengi colony or Ferengi starship, they ended up with loads of these weapons sitting around waiting for recycling, and the renegade drones had simply attached them to themselves. You decide. Tell me in the comments below what you think. Next we go on to a more exotic and unusual weapon used by the Ferengi Light Whip. This was an unusual weapon, first encountered by humans in the mid-22nd century, utilised by a group of renegade Ferengi pirates who attempted to hijack the Enterprise. This weapon was seen to have a yellow energy burst when flicked, which caused a stream of energy to project from the weapon, hitting its target and stunning them. The 24th century version was more powerful but blue in coloration and seemed to have better range, although it could have been because of the confined space aboard the starship that was limiting the utilization of this weapon to its full potential. This is an extremely unorthodox weapon. It's not known if it has a kill setting. It can also function as a standard whip, and we can assume you could strangle or simply whip someone to death with it, or perhaps multiple impacts on the weapon would have a cumulative effect. As we know, stun at close range will still kill if you hit someone in the right spot hard enough and for long enough. And quite frankly, if this thing was still a whip, you probably could just, as I said, whip them to death with it. This is probably the closest thing to a traditional Ferengi weapon we know about as anything beyond a knife or other such basic weapon. In terms of a more sophisticated weapon, this could be considered to be the Ferengi equivalent of a bat'leth or a katana, a sort of more traditional weapon that goes back in time, which is still utilized in some form in the modern age by its respective creator species. It's not a weapon other races would necessarily choose to use and has not been seen utilized by other species. Only the Ferengi have been seen to wield it, and even then under select circumstances, but even Ferengi action figures played with by Ferengi children actually have this weapon as their weapon of choice. So there is something to be made of the thought that this could be a traditional weapon. And lastly, a weapon which may actually have deserved a video all of its own, which let me know if you want a more detailed exploration of this device in the comments below. I'll try and get to it. But that is the Thought Maker. Now, thinking of this device, pun intended, I'm so sorry, this device may not actually be made by the Ferengi, but dialogue indicates that it probably was, at least originally developed by them, if not encountered and recovered and replicated by them. It's not entirely clear. My personal impression was that it truly was a piece of Ferengi technology. But getting past that, this device was banned in the Ferengi Alliance and subsequently in the Federation also, although other powers such as the Romulans would take a great interest in it. It was basically a mind control device, artificial telepathy. It put its subjects into a sort of hypnagogic state, which basically means you were very susceptible to hypnosis, basically, as well as putting thoughts into your head, making you do what they want. It made you very suggestible. It was able to convince Captain Jean-Luc Picard, a man who had a very strong will and knew himself really well. It made him believe that he was still in command of the USS Stargazer and under attack from the Enterprise D. Damon Bock did use this device to get revenge on Picard, which was not a profitable act and ultimately caused his crew to mutiny against him, as there was no profit in revenge, at least not this kind of revenge, and making an enemy of the Federation and pissing off the Federation flagship wasn't on the agenda for his crew, so it got him mutinied. However, the device itself is still a miracle of technology. It's designed to interfere with a humanoid's brain, make them susceptible to basically suggestion and implanting false memories and thoughts in their heads, and can pretty much, as we see, make them do practically anything. This could be one of the single most powerful weapons ever created. I mean, hear me out. A phaser is powerful. Now, it can kill, it can vaporize, it's incredible. We see phasers, for example, vaporize something the size of an SUV without problem, without an issue. We see phasers fired from orbit at a planet's surface or from a planet's surface into high orbit and able to take out whole sections of cities, disintegrate entire buildings. We see a particularly powerful phaser cut a great swath across Earth at one point. Phasers are an incredibly powerful weapon, but they're a blunt instrument. Yes, they're versatile, but they are a blunt instrument. Now imagine you've got a big, heavily armed, powerful starship like the Scimitar, for example. It's enormously powerful, it's so destructive. It's got dozens of disruptors, hundreds of torpedoes. It's got a cloaking device that it can fire through. It's got advanced shielding. This ship is a battle wagon unto itself. Now imagine you're aboard some little pissant shuttlecraft, but you've got a Thought Maker on board, and you influence the reman commander of that ship, and you convince him that your enemies are his enemies, and he goes off and destroys them. We see something similar with the Saturans. who used a similar device, albeit again a bit more of a direct one, a bit more of a clumsy, less accurate one than this, but it had a similar effect. Now just imagine if you were to scale up this weapon, attack the entire crew of a ship, you could turn entire fleets of enemy vessels into your own puppet, your fleet. Not an enemy fleet any longer. It doesn't matter how heavily armed they are, those phasers are useless against this. It's an incredibly powerful weapon. It could also be used not just in a singular battle situation, but if you were to occupy an enemy planet and set up a few hundred of these devices all over the planet or in orbit, projecting some kind of energy field downwards, you could make the population believe that you would always be their benevolent masters, make them subservient and worship you, and without ever having to fire a weapon. They would simply surrender and believe that this had always been the way. I'm not saying any of this is a good use of the weapon, mind you. I am just saying it does have some interesting potential. So there we have the general weapons of the Ferengi that we see them utilise. Of course, the Ferengi have a multitude of other weapons at their disposal, as any major power with the resources they have would do, but these are the most common weapons we see utilised by the Ferengi Alliance. Let me know in the comments below if I missed any, and if you would like a bigger breakdown of the thought making. With all that said, that is the end of this video. I just want to take this moment to thank you for watching that video. If you liked what you saw, please check out my social links in the description box below to Instagram and Twitter and others, and also is down there a link to my Patreon page where you can support this channel and the others as I try to grow this franchise and do this more regularly. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you for watching, and bye bye.